of discussion around governance, and some very good work has been done prior to this. So what I'm going to do is just enhance what's already there. So the first screen here, I've listed some of the resources that were already on the site for a refresher. Again, we're going to try and answer as many of the questions as possible. So if I don't get to them today, then on Thursday at 10 to 11, I will be doing an hour of Q&As for anyone who has questions that wasn't dealt with today. So let's get started on overview of today. So what is the objective? Basically to understand the roles and responsibility of the boards and the committees, the duty and decision power behind the people who organize or run the board, the scope of the duties, and what do all boards have in common. So although some boards may have several different committees with different names, the commonality that exists between nonprofit corporate boards are there's always a chair, there's always a vice chair, secretary, and treasurer. So today we're going to look at their duties, their responsibility, and how they help organizations stay afloat. Okay? So let's look at what is a board. A board is a body that is elected or appointed, as we all know. It's members who basically have the vision of the organization and wants to move that organization or company forward. So most of the boards that I've sat on, there have been about 20 members. I think after 20, it gets a little bit creative as a chair or as a board member to facilitate meetings. So there are different sizes of boards. It could be as small as 10, as large as 50. Again, part of your bylaws usually define how many board members your organizations are going to have. So I'm going to talk in future sessions about the bylaws, and I'm going to talk about how it governs how boards operate. But today we're going to look specifically on roles and responsibility. And like any new job, being on a board is a volunteer job, and it requires a job description. So within the job descriptions, it has roles, responsibility. It also has some characteristics of what you're looking for in board members. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Can you hold on a moment, please? I'm just having a little bit of technical difficulty. I need to Okay, thank you for that. I just needed to reorganize the slides. So before we get started, I just wanted to have the audience basically answer the following question. So we're going to do a brief poll to find out what is the role of the board, the directors of a nonprofit organization. And in the poll, you have 4 options. So do they participate in administration, guidance, and supervision? Do they govern the organization? Is it they govern, participate, and administrate or supervise, or do they report to the executive director? So at this point, I'd like you to kind of choose one. I'm not seeing the poll come up, so I'm wondering if you are seeing the poll, and if you would just take a moment to answer those questions. I just want to get a general sense of what's your understanding of roles of the directors. While I'm waiting for that, I just basically wanted to look at the characteristic of the individuals who would be sitting on a board. So we're looking for people who have the ability to listen. We're looking for people who can analyze. We're looking for people who are clear thinker. We're thinking people who work well with others. Very important. I mean, sometimes people come forth and they say, I would like to sit on your board, but they have issues with working with others, or they have issues with working with diversity. I think it's important that we ensure that the person is a fit for the type of organization as well as mission that you're trying to achieve. When you have a board that is functioning well and you bring in new members, you want them to fit in rather than create new issues for the board. The other thing is a willingness to attend board meetings. It's time-consuming as a board member. It could be 2 or 3 meetings a month. You have to be able to be available. So part of your role is being able to attend meetings, being able to ask questions, being able to take responsibility and follow through on assignments. You also have to be able to be reflective on yourself. What am I bringing? Am I able to sit through issues that I'm not comfortable with and make decisions on behalf of the organization? What learning do I have to do in order for me to get there? Also be willing to develop skills that you don't have, because one of the beautiful things of joining the boards is, again, to get, I would say, transferable skills. So it gives you an opportunity to acquire education in an area that you may not be versed with. So it's a great way to get transferable skills and experience. Also be able to cultivate and recruit volunteer. Now that's an art form. The ability to actually recruit volunteer and to keep them engaged is also part of the responsibility of the board. Also be able to read the financial statements and learn more about the programs and activities that the organization actually facilitate. The person should also have a level of honesty. I mean, if you are dealing with confidential issues, you are dealing with money, sometimes you're dealing with contentious issues. So again, being able to be tolerant, accepting, inclusive, challenge your bias as well, and basically patience. I mean, I've sat through many board meetings where, you know, you have to be patient, or else you'd end up in situations where you wouldn't move the topic along. It just leads to argument. A great part as well is to be able to bring humor, especially when you are in a situation where you can't seem to move forward and we're rehashing the same information over and over again. Sometimes it's nice to just have someone that is sitting around that can bring a level of levity to the issues just to help you refocus. So those are all characteristics that we are looking at. So response to my poll, basically, it says that 0% of the audience thought that participate in administration, guidance, and supervision. 71% thought that governance was the correct answer. 29% thought that A and B were the correct answer, and 0% report to the executive director. It's actually a combination of A and B. As a board person, you are participating in administration, not the day-to-day administration, but the financial administration of the organization. Guidance, you are giving the executive director guidance around so by developing policies and procedures on behalf of the organization. That's how you're giving guidance. Supervision, you are also supervising and responsible for supervision of the executive director. So part of that is also. And then your major responsibility is the governance or the operation of the organization. And what I mean by that is making sure that the bylaws and all of the pieces that is necessary for you, including the corporation laws of nonprofit, having a thorough understanding of that is in place. So thank you for that, and continue to ask questions. So we're going to move on. Okay. So I have, again, another poll. The chair is responsible for the running of the board. Is that a yes or a no answer? Do you believe that or do you not? So I'll give you a minute to take an opportunity to look at the role of the chair, as I just talk a little bit to this to help you maybe clarify your answers. 100% says 89% says true, and 11% said false. The chair, and it would be interesting to understand the 11% perspective of why they don't believe the chair is responsible for running the board. The chair's role is, in fact, the duty of the ensuring that the board runs smoothly. So the chair is the one that serves as supervisor, for lack of a better word, of the board. They communicate with all of the board members. They also communicate with the community. They communicate with the executive director. They give direction as to financial monitoring, the rights and responsibility that surround the financial planning. They also ensure that the mission of the organization, the goals and objective of the organization is followed. They make sure that the meetings are run according to the timeline that is given. Sometimes they also ask special committees to strike up for the purpose of dealing with a quick issue. So the person in the role of the chair, I like to call like the manager of the board. So that person is responsible for ensuring that the board functions fluidly, that it functions in a way that supports the executive director's need as well as the organizational growth. And having been the chair of a couple of organizations, I can say to you, it's labor intensive. The chair has to have a responsibility to learn not only the mission statement, but also how to work with all the board members, all the committee members, as well as how to work with the funders, as well as the community. Because there are times where, as the chair, you have to step in and be the face of the organization. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. Okay? So the other piece that I talked about at the beginning is these are the positions, the next five positions I'm going to talk about, that every board share in common. They all have a chair. Some may call them a president. Some may call them a vice president. It depends on the type of organization. But every single board out there has that, with the exception of collective. But even in a collective model, there's always someone who takes on kind of the leadership role to guide the process. So the only time that in a collective model you may not find that organization puts themselves in a hierarchy. So that's the only exception maybe to this, because the collective that I'm thinking of that I sat on, we had a chair. We had a vice chair. So again, I think it depends on the type of collective and how their bylaws came about. So I'd be interested to know how many of you sits on board where your structure is collective base, operational base, and how does that filter into the roles and responsibility that each board member takes on. So the other one here is the vice chair. So the vice chair basically is the chair in training, is a way of looking at it. So that's the person that if the chair is not available, that person steps in and takes on the duty of that individual. They have the same voting power as anyone else on the board, and they assume membership duties. They can sit on other committees as well, and they understand, it's key to understand the role of the chair. Because there's nothing worse than the chair, for whatever reason, is sick or something happens and not able to fulfill the duty, and the person who is in the vice chair role is not aware of the current issue or what's going on. So it's that person is in training. And it's a natural transition. It makes sense that at the next election, that if that outgoing chair, that person leaves, they choose not to continue their duty, that the vice chair would be the next person that comes in. So any questions at this point? Okay, I hope that is clear. Okay, The role of the secretary, the job that I think most board members do not like, because it involves a lot of minute taken, and not just minute taken, it has to be exact, clear, transparent minute taken that dictates what was said, who it was said, when their decision made. You have to ensure that it's recorded properly. The minutes are sent out shortly after each board minute to the members, including members who may or may not have participated in the meeting. They also get to vote the same as any other board member. They're responsible usually for keeping all the records within the board. So annual statements, financial statements, usually you basically say, ask the secretary and they will tell you where those things are kept. They also guide the meeting, so if you're off track, they ensure that the bylaws that you're conducting meetings, so they are the accountability piece for the chair to ensure that that person is running the meetings according to bylaw. They communicate about the agenda to the member at large, so basically they will send out a request for agenda items and ensure that the chair have the information before each meeting to facilitate the meeting. Get any documentation that is necessary to support the agenda. The secretary also can be involved in the annual report between the chair, executive director, and the secretary. Sometimes as the chair, executive director, financial person, the treasurer, and the secretary works together to do the annual financial report. Each organization has it set up differently. So your organization may not use the secretary for this role, but some organizations do. And sometimes this role is held by the executive director. Not often, but I guess when numbers are low or we're not able to fill that position, the executive director will sometimes step in and hold that role. Do we have any questions at this one? Okay. And the role of the treasurer. Previous discussion and discussions I've noticed on the form always comes back to, should the treasurer have financial background? I think because of the amount of work that is to be done around money, I would say that they should have a strong understanding of finance. It would just make sure that the process is smooth, that you're able to move process quicker. Whereas if you don't have someone that has a financial background, then you're left with, every time an issue comes up, you have to put that issue on hold until you're able to get the answer. So this is when you're trying to recruit someone in the role that may be an accountant, may be just someone that has a very strong background in finance, because they're the ones who help prepare the annual report, the budget. So they prepare it on behalf of the board. The chair takes it, reviews it, they bring it to the meeting, and basically it's voted upon by the members, include the members at large, to ensure that there is accountability each time around the financial overseeing of the organization. They also look at financial forecasts, and what I mean by that is the program, how well are they functioning? Are there sufficient money to keep the program running? What are some of the trends that are happening in the community? And how to go about doing the fundraising aspects of ensuring that there is now financial resources available to continue programs. Those forecasts or analysis could be done monthly or quarterly, depending on how often the board meets and the type of organization that you operate. The other thing is that, again, like all other positions, this person also has the ability to vote on issues as they arise. Any questions at this point? Okay. And the role of committees. So at the beginning I said that periodically the chair will ask to strike a committee. Sometimes there are committees that are standing committees, so they've been in existence for as long as the board has been in existence. So one of them could be the fundraising committee, the other one could be the recruitment committee, the other one could be the executive committee that basically, if the executive director is not continuing in the position, that's the person who you know, rewrites the job description and help with the development of getting a new ED. So the role of the committee is dictated again by the bylaws within your organization. So every organization within their board bylaws should have some regulation around the roles and responsibility of committees and the need for them, right? And if there is a need for them that is not written, then this is where the board sits and have conversations about, we have a new issue, or we have a new study that needs to be done, and there's a new committee, and then they have to go through the process of ensuring that the bylaws and the policy is written before that committee could be struck. So the purpose or the role as needed, so they can be for one issue or they can be for several issues. There must be a current board member. So basically, if it's someone who has left the board, that you can use that person for the historical context within the organization, but very rarely do ex-board members sit on current committees. Look for diversity in the background so that that person has skills and knowledge that is specific to the needs of the committee. It's not good enough for you to say, oh, they're doing a fundraising and I think I'd be interested in it, but you have absolutely no interest in fundraising or the work of raising resources, and then you sit at the committee and you don't contribute. So what you want is that the people who identify themselves as wanting to be on the committee, they're actually people who have an interest in that particular work. And as I said, the bylaw should state the purpose of why this particular committee is going to be standing and for the period in which they're going to be standing. Okay? Special committees, they're formed usually at the very first board meeting. Previous organizations that I've sat on the board, things like when we're going to do strategic planning, a committee would be struck at the very first meeting. People's interests would be identified. Who would like to sit on the strategic planning committee? So when I say special, it's special to the development of the organization, and usually it's based on issues that's been identified in the previous board, or issues that's been identified by the executive director, the staff, or the trends in the community that the board has to kind of take a look at and see if it's something that, or an area they want to go towards. So by striking a special committee, they can do the background work, because let's face it, it's not possible for a board to do within itself all the work that is needed in order to move an organization forward. So you will need at times the help of committee members to take on issues to free up regular staff, board meetings, so that you're able to get through issues. Because can you imagine if you did not have subcommittee or special committees, every single issue would be brought to the board within a year or 2 years. If that's your time that allotted for being a board member, you probably would get 1 or 2 issues completed. So this is why it's so important that you look at the special committees to take on issues, and then it allows the board to kind of focus on the day-to-day pieces that's needed to move forward. They make recommendation, so they will make a recommendation and they bring it back to the board. The board again will vote on those decisions and then put it into practice. One of the things when you make the recommendation, if you are part of a special committee, when that issue is brought forth at the board meeting, this is the opportunity for people to add some meat to why they made the recommendation. So they're going to give the background. And it's wonderful because then you have this whole wealth of knowledge within the board that you can tap into on a particular issue. So it frees up the chair and the vice chair to do other things. So that has been beneficial for me when I've sat in the role of the chair of the board, to be able to look to the subcommittee or the special committee to guide some of the decision making. Notes, minutes is important in any meeting that happens on behalf of the board. So part of the role, if you take on like the chair of a subcommittee, you have to ensure that the minutes are kept, that decisions and how the process plays itself is also documented, because it's very important in all the roles and responsibility that transparency becomes one of the most important part of that, right? Okay. Any questions at this moment around the roles and why I put those 5 together? Okay. So who sits on the committees? Again, I talked about that. The function of the committee will dictate who sits on it. So if it's a fundraising committee, someone with fundraising experience or fundraising interest will sit on that committee. If it's a program and policy development, then someone with good writing skills, someone who has an interest in writing policies and developing policies. And it would be good to have at least one person that has a background in what that specific committee is about. Nothing like having 6 or 7 people sit around the table and go, do you have any idea what it is we're supposed to be doing? Nope, have no clue. As an end result, you meet week after week after week and you get nowhere. So it's important to have the function, right, of the committee fits with the personal skills, their expertise, and the match to what it is that's needed. I don't like to waste time when I'm doing work. I want to get to the meat of the work and I want to get it done, because I'm thinking if the board, the chair has entrusted me with a decision, they want a decision, they want information, they want it timely. So they're not wanted 3 months down the road, unless it's something that's going to take 3 months and I have to do reporting within my timeline, because even within the committee, you have to also say there are going to be moments of growth and there are going to be moments of stagnation. So you have to also be able to report on milestones. Did we achieve something? Did we not achieve something? Where are we in the process? So you have to continue to talk to the board at large to let them know where you are in the process. So the example I gave is if you're part of the audit committee, you know, 1 or 2 members should have a background in finance, because it would make the process move very, very, very fast. If you have people who, you know, they're interested in program development and they're sitting in finance, well, let's put it this way, you'll have a lot of information on program development, not a lot on finance. Okay? So setting up a committee, usually the chair makes a request to the members to take on a specific issues, as I've said. The committee is struck, missions, goals, and objectives is set specifically for that committee. Meetings are scheduled, task is handed out to the individual members, so everyone takes on a duty. Timelines and milestones are basically identified, so it's almost like you're doing a business plan of how you're going to operate. Minutes are taken every time you meet. A report is provided with recommendation and evaluation of the process. So pros and cons for taking a particular perspective is provided to the chair. Background on the issues. So the members, again, I've said this over and over, they provide the background. So when you sit at the general board meeting, the members within the committee can then provide the background. And once a decision is made, the chair of the subcommittee will report back to the bigger board and give a conclusion as to the process that happened and the final recommendation, so that the board can then at large can vote on the decision and move again forward. So we look at a little bit of responsibilities. So as a board member, as I said, it's a job. So when you take on your job, you need to understand your responsibility. So your responsibility is to understand the bylaw constitution of the corporation, organization that you are a part of. And I don't say that lightly, because I think sometimes we volunteer and we don't have the time. So you see the binders on the shelf, or when you get the orientation, you know, they say, here is your resource package. And you look at it and you go, my gosh, there's 4 binders of constitution or bylaws. It's important that you take the time to kind of understand, because the bylaws and constitution governs how you operate as a board. It keeps you out of legal harm. So if you do nothing as a new board member other than understand the bylaws and constitution within your first 3 months, that would in the long run serve your organization more than anything you could possibly do. The board of directors acts as the voice. They're the decision makers within the organization, and what I mean by that is the executive director works on behalf of the organization to ensure that policies and procedures are implemented according to the governance that are set forth, but it's the board's responsibility to ensure that the governance are there and that they're clear to all parties involved. That you also, the Not-for-Profit Corporate Act is complicated. I've recently spent a couple of days reading it, and you don't really need a legal degree per se to understand it, but you will have to read it a couple of times to get the gist of each piece. And the piece around the directors and their roles and responsibility and how committees could be struck would be very important if you're going to go right now to check out the Corporate Act. It has a clear definition around roles and responsibility, how committees are struck, and I found that very helpful in actually developing this module to help me guide the process. Also, part of the responsibility is to make sure that if you have tax exempt status, that you do what's necessary to protect that, you maintain the financial integrity of the organization, and that you make sure that you stay on course. There's nothing worse for an executive director that the previous board and him or her have worked very hard towards achieving certain objectives or goals or mission, and then a new board comes on and they haven't done their homework and basically spend so much time coming up with new ways of trying to run the organization, for lack of a better word, that it takes you off course. So I think it's important that you understand your roles so that you're able to move the organization forward rather than keep it stagnant. Okay? So at this time, I'd like to throw out another poll, basically asking, who is the owner of the organization, of your organization? Is it the shareholders, is it the staff, or is it the board of directors? And when I say that, it's an interesting question, because I think many staff, I know myself when I worked in the front line in settlement, you think that the executive director is the person you are reporting to, and that's the only person that you're responsible to. And then as I got into doing more of this type of work, I realized that back in the day, I was completely wrong. So I'm curious to see, for the people who are sitting right now, who do you think is the owner of your organization? And the reason I'm asking that is in order for you to understand who owns the organization, it also helps you to be clear about your roles and responsibility as a board member. So we have 67% says shareholders, 38% says the board of director, and nothing for staff. Well, the A's are closest to it, and the bottom line is the shareholders are the owners of the organization. The funders of your organization actually owns the organization. You report to the executive director, but the shareholders are the ones who are the power to close you down, to continue to fund you. So I think when we look at organization and we look at roles and responsibility, it's important that we realize that the shareholders also play a crucial role in ownership within the organization, because they don't only fund you, they set the guidelines of how you operate. And that's where, as a board member, you have to understand your role is to ensure that you're meeting the guidelines set out within the contract. And you do so by putting enough resources, making resources available for the executive director to do his or her job within the context of supervising the organization. So the board of directors determines a job description and hires the executive director or manager and sets the salary, the compensation for the executive director. But the executive director reports to the board reports to the funders, and the board may report through the funders via the executive director. So it's very important in the role as chair that the chair and executive director has a fluid, good communication, working relationship, because it makes a difference to how goals and objectives is achieved within the organization. Okay? So the piece about shareholders and reporting, it's huge in your role, it's huge in your responsibility. As a board member, you have the reports that you produce via the minutes, via the committee reports, is part of your responsibility as a board member to ensure that the funders are aware of the process. So at any time, a funder could come in, I think, and say to you, you know, I would like to see the minutes, I would like to see. And sometimes we are very protective of the minutes that we keep, and I think this is where I'll just take a minute to say that minutes should never ever be a conversation. The minutes should just state the clear facts. It should basically, you know, what was the issue, what was the decision, and who supported the decision. Sometimes we put a lot of stuff in it about personal opinion that is not necessary, and I think if you are looking at the shareholders as your boss, they don't really want the personal piece. They just want to know what was the decision, right? Who voted on it, and did you move it forward? So important when you're doing a shareholders report to make it clear and concise. Board of directors, again, part of the responsibility is the revenue and expense, and to make sure that you have a thorough understanding of how the money is spent. Are you running a surplus? Are you working at a deficit? And if you're working at a deficit, where do you get the money to support the programs? So this is where we're going to talk a little bit in a couple of minutes about the board's role around fundraising, and is it a responsibility that the board should undertake? Okay? So part of the responsibility, again, is to ensure the organization is able to provide goods and service to the community. Basically, that's why we're there, you know, as board members, is to ensure that the process, the policy, the strategic planning, the resources that the executive director and the staff needs in order for them to do the work, that's why we are there, is to support them. Because they are the face of the organization on the day-to-day. We're the background to make sure that, you know, they have the resources that they need. The other pieces is also just make sure that funds are available. If you're a board that is ineffective, you basically will run the organization in the ground, and you want to be the kind of organization where you are the best practice in the community. You want to be the board that you're the best practice in the community. So it's important to be able to have the resources necessary to do that. Okay? So what is the biggest duty of the board? Poll number 5. What is the biggest duty of the board? Is it fundraising? Is it supervising the executive director? And is it writing policy? Take a moment to just give me feedback on what do you think. And I think the answer might surprise a few of you. Okay, so we have 67% says fundraising, and 33% says write-in policy. Oh, we have a change to 38% says fundraising, 13% says supervising the executive director, and 50% says write-in policy. So if you are a policy board, then 50% of your job, the people who said 50%, I would agree that if you were a policy board, numbers are changing again? Oh, okay. If you were an operational board, so it depends on the type of board. So this question is a little bit of a trick question in the sense that the type of board you operate will dictate your biggest duty. Most boards do not take this on and should take this on, fundraising. We are so reliant on one funding source. And when that funding source dries up, so do the staff and the program within the organization. Boards should also have the responsibility of setting up a fundraising committee to ensure that goods and service is always available to the public. So they are coming up with a strategic plan of how they're going to grow the organization. Should not be the role of the staff. It shouldn't be the role of the executive director, excuse me. This should be the role of the board to grow the financial resources of the organization. Okay? So thank you for that feedback. Interesting. So I wonder if the 50% who said write in policy, if they sat on, how many of you actually sit on policy boards? So did that influence your response? So if you have a moment and you just wanted to type in, that would be good. Or you can come to the forum on Thursday and just give a little bit of feedback as to type of board and how you come to the decision around that. Okay? We talked about the board's role, and it's very clear. Policy in place. The board of directors is responsible for the management. So I'm just kind of revamping some of the stuff that I've already said. Set standards. But not set standards that just sit on the shelf. What's the point of writing procedures if it's never going to be used? So once the procedures are used, this is when you have opportunities to sit with staff committees and actually explain the procedures so that, you know, in the day-to-day pieces of the work, it's actually being followed. One of the things that I've noticed in the past is that the standards, as funding change, the standard stays the same. And that's unfortunate because as funding change, the requirement changes, and so should the procedures and the standards. In order for an organization to grow, part of the responsibility that the board should take on is to understand how to support those new changes by setting standards of operation within the context of staff service to help, again, best practice to keep the organization growing, moving forward. So if the funding requirements has changed, so should your procedures of operation and so should your standards, right? And the board basically relies on the executive director to guide them in this process because 99% of the people who will sit on board will not be versed specifically with the day-to-day operations. They may have an interest, they may have a background in finance or banking or so forth, but they may not have information about the sector. There's a difference between corporate and not-for-profit directors, and not-for-profit directors set missions. They're visionaries in that sense. They strategic plan. You hear me talk about that a lot, and I think a good board, a good board annually do strategic planning. Right? The strategic planning is how do you move the organization forward? How do you take the issues and bring it to conclusion? So that when the new board members come on, they have a model to follow. They can say, oh, okay, this is what they were working on. This is where we are in the process. So it's important to understand that. Like the strategic planning of an organization is key to the growth of the organization, and this is where the board is responsible for doing. They also evaluate and revisit the goals. Are you meeting the goals? Is the goals no longer necessary? Do you need to change them? That's part of the role of the board. Develop a business plan. It's interesting. I did a little bit of reading. and basically found out that a lot of the organization, and the Alliance for Not-for-Profit Management did a survey as well, and they basically supported my thought as well around the idea that boards that do business plan are the most successful in achieving their goals. So what I mean by that is when a board takes on a business plan or a strategic plan around the governing of the organization, where they have checks and balances in place, and they basically have said, this is how we're going to operate. So we're starting here and we're going to move to, within 2 years, within a year, this is where we want to be. Those boards have been the most successful. Those are the boards that people have sat the longest on, and they've been the most productive. So if you don't currently have a business plan or a strategic plan, I would encourage you as a board chair, as a board, to actually look at how are you functioning right now. Are you just doing Band-Aids? So every time an issue comes up, you're basically just dealing with that? Or do you actually have a strategic long-term plan in place, short and long-term plan in place for how you're going to grow the organization, programs-wise as well as financially? Okay? And I talked a little bit before about fundraising. Coming back to that again, biggest duty of the board, bar none, should be fundraising. Develop a financial plan. How many of you who sit on boards currently actually have sat down and looked at the financial statement before you became a board member, the quarterly financial statement? Are you on par? Are you where you should be currently? Is the spending reflective of the funding, right? Do you understand that? And who do you seek out to get that information? Again, it goes back with the working relationship between the executive director. Just looking to see again, any questions at this time? Wow, no questions. I must be doing something right. Again, I've talked about the budget, the financial overview. It is the responsibility of the board, and I can't highlight that more. It is your job as a board of directors to make sure that the resources that is needed and necessary for keeping and attracting staff is available. Policies and procedures are in place so that there's no questions about expectations around standards and how we operate. That's your job. That's why you come together. Also, as a board member, sometimes you're also the public face of the organization. 99% of the time, I think the executive director or someone within the organization is identified as the person who speaks to the press, but the odd time the chair of the board steps in, especially around political times, to represent the views on behalf of the organization. So it's important that we keep that face respectable. Again, conflict of interest. Declare them confidentiality. When you are the public face, you have to be transparent. You have to be able to be approachable. Transparency, key piece to success as a board as well. At any given time, when you're asked for financial statements, you're asked for minutes, it should be readily available. Okay? When you do not have a skill within the board, one of the things that you're doing as the face of the organization is, as you represent the board in the community, you're trying to get people's interest in wanting to volunteer. So you seek out and you maintain relationships that will benefit the organization. So as a board chair, if there's a meeting that's going on about new funding or some program within the community that will impact your organization or will enhance your organization, trying to make time to participate in those meetings so that you're aware of how that may impact your programs. Usually, again, the executive director or someone within the staff will sit on that. But as the chair of the board or as a board committee member, if you have the time, it doesn't hurt to actually show your support by participating in that. Gain community support. Help to get volunteers, help to get donation, help with grant write-in and proposal write-in. Again, the executive director is quite versed in doing the grant and proposal write-in, but I think as the chair of the board or a board member, you should understand the grants that are written on behalf of the organization. You monitor the organization as well. I've said this, you monitor, and the way you monitor is to ensure that the policies are evaluated annually, if not quarterly. The policies of how you operate needs to be looked at. Write them, put them in a book, and they stay on the shelf collecting dust. We don't want that. We want to actually know that the staff is using them, that they're functioning, that they support the work that is being done. And if they don't support the work, then taking the time to revisit it, possibly rewriting them. Okay? And then, again, to ensure policy procedures are being carried out by the program director, executive directors, and members. And it's also important that when you sit within the board that you hold each other accountable for what you do. I've sat on many, many boards where, you know, someone is running off on a tangent and people are sitting there and you're going, hold on, wait a minute. No, you need to come back. You need to, this has absolutely nothing to do with the minutes, the meeting at large right now. We need you to stay focused. We need you to stay on task. And I think it's important that where we talked at the beginning about the characteristics of board, this is where you find it's very important that you have to be able to challenge your core board member. That's part of your responsibility. It's part of your duty, is to ensure that a uniform voice, right, when you come up with the decision-making process, that it's uniform, as close to possible, as close to as possible. There are going to be times where you're not able to move the meeting forward, and you stop the process until people are educated on what they need to be. But I think it's important that as board members, we hold each other accountable. Review executive directors' performance, give feedback, also part of your role. And if for whatever reason the executive director resigns, then it is the board's responsibility through executive committee to hire someone to facilitate recruiting of a new executive director. Talked about setting policies. We talked about the vision, the mission. We talked about being flexible to adapt to change. Key piece, as a board member, if the funding crisis happens and you have to then change your mandate to become fundraising focused rather than policy focused, you have to have the flexibility to adapt to that change. So when you're looking for board members, you also look for board members who are able to do those things. So I'm going to review the main duties of the boards of directors. So as I originally started out saying, the primary responsibility is to hire executive director, fundraising, provide feedback to the executive director, to review performance of the board at large, to keep reports, to ensure that the minutes of each meeting are clearly written, they're stored in a proper place within the organization, that the agenda information goes out on time, and that subcommittees are struck as necessary. The report back from the subcommittees are voted on in a timely manner, that you sign off on grants and contracts, that you're aware of the financial solvency of that organization, that you are able to be a public face, that you're comfortable with public speaking, because sometimes you do have to do that, that you have an understanding of the donors who financially support the organization, as well as the funders, and that you're constantly looking for new avenue to raise funds on behalf of the organization. You're an advocate. Every time you are within the community, you're an advocate. You are advocating on the issues. You're advocating for change. That's why we're here, right? Is to help the community grow, to support the needs of the community, to support the needs of the organization, and to support the needs of the staff. If you're going to be a board member and you cannot attend the meetings, then you might want to be something else, do something else, because there's nothing worse than going to a board meeting where you're supposed to vote on contentious issues, or there's a timely decision that needs to be made, but you don't have enough members in order for you to do the votes, or the members didn't send in their votes by proxy. And then the other responsibility you have is when new members come on to act as a mentor or a guide for the new board members to help them to feel comfortable. I think the mentorship piece for new board members guarantees success. If you take on, if you're part of the second year and the new year people are coming in, and you take on one member and you say you're going to shadow them, you're going to help them to understand the roles and responsibility that they've just signed on to, that will guarantee success, because then they have somebody to turn to. They have somebody that they can say, you know, I don't understand the historical piece, and you can give them that point of reference. So at this point, do we have any other questions? No? Okay. I talked a bit about corporate boards and the difference between a corporate board. The structure may be the same to a nonprofit organization in the sense that they would have a president, a vice president, a secretary, a treasurer, executive officer. The corporate boards, they tend to supervise the CEO. They hire and fire the CEO. So at the end, they determine, bottom line is, if that person is on par with their duties or not. So if you have a 2-year contract or a 3-year contract, basically the person isn't doing their job, so they can decide to release the person. And they're also the ones who then seek out a new CEO. Publicly held corporation, the Nonprofit Corporation Act has a clear definition of the difference between the two. I would suggest that you spend a little bit of time as a board chair, as a board, to read the Corporate Act to help you with clear understanding if you are a for-profit board and how you differ from the non-for-profit. It's more directly related to the financial management. It's kind of like corporate board almost works like a management board, because they are responsible for the day-to-day supervision of the financial management, the executive director. So I think the difference between the for-profit and the non-for-profit is that the non-for-profit spends time with the missions, goals, and objective, whereas the for-profit looks at the legal, not to say that the non-for-profit do not, but their focus is more on like espionage or like, you know, those kind of stuff, insiders trading, you know, the legal implication for the day-to-day actions that is taken on behalf of the executive director or the CEO of the company. Okay? So we're going to look at, this one is just to kind of give you a recap of roles and responsibility. So what else didn't I mention already? The license and setting standards, I didn't mention that one. Oversees the organization compliance with legal regulations. Understand the communication of the organization in regards to the mission statement. So how do you ensure that programs are operating according to the value and missions? By setting standards, you can ensure that happens. Again, the legal responsibility, participate in a lot of committee meetings, assess performances, both of the board and of the executive director. When there is a need for legal advice, seek out legal advice if it's not represented on the board. And usually you wouldn't want the legal person on the board should not be the only voice that you seek out when it comes to getting legal advice. You should actually have a legal firm that is not associated with the organization to do those issues for you, to answer the questions specifically for you. I think that's one way to make sure that transparency, again, is kept and conflicts of issues issue, you can go to the legal department if you have one within your board to say, okay, here is a conflict of interest and get information. But when it comes down to, say for instance, someone wants to sue the board or stuff like that, that's when you would actually want to seek outside counsel rather than a member within the board, because in that situation, you're also in the issue, so it's hard to separate yourself. So I would suggest that at the end of this that you take an opportunity to just review the slides and get more information on your responsibility as a board member. And bottom line, and I cannot stress this enough, the board is responsible for the financial running, the financial, the banking, the auditing, all of the pieces that goes into the operation of an organization. And each new board member needs to have an orientation specifically on the financial structure, the insurance and the coverage that is offered to board members, the coverage that within the organization, who do you bank with, what are the service fees, all of those things are part of the board's responsibility to understand how those things play into the use of financial resources. Again, I just want to check and see if we have any last minute questions. Okay, we're good. So I would like to thank you very much, and I apologize again for my tardiness. I was hoping that the weather outside would not be a problem today, but it was. I would like you to join me on Thursday, June 27th. Any questions that may come up. The roles and responsibility part, I think of all of the governance part, to me is the clearest, because once you understand your role, it's almost like there's a job description that is written with the duties. So if you're taking on the role of the chair, you know exactly what that should be. Your job is to ensure that the board meetings are run and that you are the face of the organization. If you're the vice chair, you know that you're there to support the chair and to step in. If you're the treasurer, your job is to do the financial piece. If you're the secretary, it's to do the minute taking. So I think this part in the series of the 6 series that I will be doing is the easiest of them to do, because again, as I said, it's like a job description and the roles are very clearly defined. It's defined in your bylaws, and the interpretation of it may not always be as clear. But if you spend some time with the bylaws, then you would have less difficulty with clarity around the roles and responsibilities. So I thank you very much for your participation today, and the feedback within the polls gave me a clear perspective on how people are processing roles and responsibility. And I think it's interesting to me when I hear back about who owns the organization and the duties that the board is supposed to undertake, and how few people even today still sees the roles and responsibility of fundraising as being a crucial part of any board. And if you don't currently do it, I'd like you to actually take that information back to your organization and say, are we doing enough around the fundraising, and how can we support organization, especially within this funding crisis? So again, I thank you. I look forward to seeing you on July 9th at 10 o'clock when we will look at who do I report to, the relationship between the executive director and the board.
All right, thank you, Joanne. Remember, hopefully we see you guys online on Thursday for the Q&A. If you have any questions and can't make it on Thursday, please feel free to email in the questions to any one of us at Uruguay's LCA or to Joanne directly. Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience today.